Maya had been watching the blue planet for what felt like forever, though her advanced chronometer told her it had only been 6 months and 17 days. Her spaceship hung silently in the shadow of an asteroid field, cloaked from human detection systems that were still primitive by galactic standards. She stood at the observation deck with her arms crossed, her pointed ears slightly drooping as exhaustion crept through her body. The violet light behind her eyes flickered and dimmed, a sign that the disease was progressing faster than her medical scanners had predicted. Time was running out. She could feel it in every cell of her body, a creeping darkness that started from her core and slowly spread outward like frost across a winter window. The Etherkin curse, her people had called it centuries ago when it first appeared. Back then they had believed it would be contained, that their healers would find a cure before it consumed them all. They had been wrong. So very wrong. Azure was the first to sense her distress. The dragon emerged from the sleeping chamber, her enormous wings folded against her scaled body as she moved gracefully through the narrow corridors of the starship. She was a magnificent creature, with scales that shimmered between deep blue and silver depending on how the light caught them. Her eyes were ancient and knowing, containing memories that stretched back beyond the formation of most star systems. Azure had been with Maya for 40 years, ever since Maya was just a young princess learning to navigate the complex world of alien diplomacy and dragon companionship. The great dragon pressed her massive head against Maya's shoulder, and Maya felt the warmth of her breath, the gentle rumble of concern in her chest. Azure could feel what Maya felt, sense what Maya sensed. It was one of the deepest bonds that existed between the Etherkin and dragons, a connection that went beyond words or simple emotion. It was a merging of consciousness, a sharing of experiences that human philosophers would have called impossible. Ember arrived moments later, moving more energetically than Azure but with equal grace. She was smaller than her companion, with scales that blazed in shades of orange and gold, and her presence was like carrying a small sun through the corridors. Ember had always been the more playful of the two dragons, more inclined toward adventure and risk-taking, but right now, even she could sense the weight of the situation pressing down on them all. Maya pressed her forehead against Azure's snout, a gesture of deep respect and affection among her people. She spoke softly, knowing that the dragons would understand not just her words but the emotions behind them, the hopes and fears that she kept buried deep in her heart. She told them about the plan, the dangerous and desperate plan that she had developed over months of research and calculations. There was a human down there, she explained, a human whose genetic code contained something rare and precious. His immune system was unlike most of his kind, stronger somehow, more adaptable. It was a mutation that appeared rarely in the human population, but when it did, it created the possibility of something extraordinary. His genes could potentially be merged with hers, could become compatible with the ancient magic that flowed through the dragon's blood. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble with odds so slim that most of her people would have called it foolish. But it was the only shot they had left. The dragons listened without judgment. They had always trusted Maya, had always believed in her wisdom even when that wisdom led them into dangerous territory. Azure let out a low growl that rumbled through the entire ship, a sound of acceptance and resolve. Ember circled around Maya in a tight spiral, her tail brushing against the walls, leaving faint traces of heat that would fade within moments. Maya made her way to the command center and began the descent sequence. The ship shuddered slightly as it engaged the planetary atmosphere, the shields flaring to life to protect them from the intense heat of entry. Down below, through the clouds of purple and green that swirled across the planet's surface, she could see the forests that covered most of the continents. Humans love to hide themselves away in places like these, she had read. They seem to need solitude and nature to balance out the chaos of their civilizations. The landing site had been carefully chosen. It was remote enough that no one would easily stumble upon the ship, but close enough to human settlements that she could reach the target quickly. The scanners had located Liam Thomas in a small cabin about 5 kilometers away, nestled on a hillside that overlooked a vast expanse of ancient forest. He had lived there for 3 years, mostly alone, mostly disconnected from other humans. Her research had shown that he was a former soldier, a man who had seen things that broke something inside him, and chose to retreat into solitude rather than try to be fixed by a society that did not understand the depth of his wounds. Maya believed he would understand her. Soldiers recognized other warriors, even if those warriors came from entirely different species and carried burdens from entirely different worlds. They both knew what it meant to carry something too heavy for most people to comprehend. They both knew what it meant to stand alone. The ship descended silently, using gravitational manipulation to guide itself down through the atmosphere without making the loud sounds that older spacecraft produced. Maya had always been thankful for etherkin technology. It allowed them to move through the universe like ghosts, nearly undetectable, nearly invisible. She changed into her human disguise as the ship approached the landing zone. It was an uncomfortable process, one that always felt slightly wrong, as if she was trying to squeeze herself into clothes that did not fit quite right. Her pointed ears retracted slightly, becoming less pronounced. Her skin tone shifted to something closer to human pale. Her eyes remained their natural violet, but she had learned long ago how to hide that with contacts and careful positioning. Azure and Ember would wait in the cargo hold, their own forms hidden by cloaking technology that would make them appear to human sensors as nothing more than unusual geological formations. They could be ready to intervene within seconds if Maya found herself in danger. They could project their consciousness through her if she needed to communicate complex concepts, but they would not interfere unless absolutely necessary. This first contact had to be Maya's alone. It had to come from a place of genuine need and honest vulnerability. As the ship settled into its landing position and the engines shut down, Maya felt her courage wavering for the first time. She had faced assassins and diplomats, had navigated political intrigue that would have driven most people insane. But now, about to step out into an alien world and reveal herself to a strange human, she felt genuinely afraid, not of rejection, though that was certainly a possibility. She was afraid of what would happen if he said yes. She was afraid of the transformation that lay ahead if this plan worked. She was afraid of changing him, of taking away his humanity and turning him into something he had never asked to become. But there was no time for fear. The disease would not wait for her courage to gather itself. It would not pause to allow her to collect her thoughts and prepare herself mentally for what lay ahead. It would simply continue its relentless march through her body, slowly shutting down system after system, stealing her life one moment at a time. She opened the airlock door and stepped out into the foreign atmosphere of this blue world. The air smelled strange, filled with scents that had no names in her language. The gravity felt slightly wrong against her feet. The sun that hung in the sky above her was a slightly different shade of yellow than the star that had warmed her homeworld billions of miles away. Everything about this place was alien and wrong and incomplete, but it was also beautiful in its own way, full of potential and possibility and the kind of wild unpredictability that made life worth living. Maya began walking toward the cabin, moving through the forest with the grace that was natural to her kind. Azure and Ember would follow at a distance, hidden by their cloaking technology, ready to act if needed. She rehearsed what she would say, knowing that words would not be enough. She would have to show him proof. She would have to make him believe that everything he thought he knew about the universe was only the smallest fragment of a much larger truth. The cabin appeared through the trees just as her scanner had predicted. Smoke rose from the chimney. Lights glowed warmly through the windows. Inside, she could sense Liam's presence, his large human mind going about its evening routine, completely unaware that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. Maya took a deep breath, gathered every ounce of courage she possessed, and walked toward the wooden door. She raised her hand and knocked. Liam was heating water for tea when he heard the knock on the door. He froze, his hand suspended over the kettle, his mind immediately going into alert mode. He did not get visitors. Not here. Not in this place that he had chosen specifically because it was isolated and difficult to reach. The only people who knew about this cabin were people he did not particularly want to see, people from his old life who occasionally tried to pull him back into a world he had rejected long ago. He moved toward the door cautiously, his military training still active, despite the 3 years he had spent trying to forget everything that training had taught him. Old habits died hard, especially when those habits had been drilled into you during the most important years of your life. He did not open the door immediately, but instead looked through the small window set into the frame, trying to see who was standing on his porch. What he saw made him pause. The woman standing outside was clearly not human, or at least not entirely human. Her features were too delicate, her skin too luminous, her ears too pointed to belong to anyone from his species. She wore simple clothes, the kind of practical garments that someone might wear on a long journey, but there was something otherworldly about the way she carried herself. It was as if she was caught between existing in this dimension and existing in some other dimension entirely. Her eyes caught the fading light of the sunset and glowed with an inner violet radiance. Liam's first instinct was to reach for the rifle he kept beside the door. His second instinct was to laugh at himself for even considering such a thing. What was he going to do? Shoot at an alien woman? He had left the military and everything it represented precisely because he could not live with the weight of violence anymore. He had come to this isolated place to find peace, to try to become a better person than the war had made him. He opened the door slowly, his hand resting on the frame, ready to close it quickly if needed. For several long seconds they simply stared at each other, two very different beings from two very different worlds, trying to make sense of an encounter that defied explanation. It was Maya who spoke first. Her voice was soft and melodious, with an accent that seemed to shift between different languages even as she spoke English. She introduced herself by her true name, the one that could not be easily pronounced by human vocal cords, but that Liam's mind somehow understood anyway. She told him that she had traveled very far, that she was very tired, and that she needed his help. Liam should have been terrified. He should have been suspicious or confused or angry. Instead, he found himself stepping aside and gesturing for her to enter. Something about her vulnerability was striking. Something about the way she swayed slightly on her feet as she spoke, as if simply standing upright was taking every ounce of strength she possessed. He recognized that look because he had seen it in his own mirror many times over the past 3 years. It was the look of someone carrying a burden too heavy for one person alone to bear. As Maya stepped inside the cabin, Azure and Ember disengaged their cloaking technology and revealed themselves. Azure landed heavily on the roof with a sound like thunder, her massive wings spreading wide as she settled into a comfortable position. Ember circled the cabin once and then transformed her appearance into that of an enormous feline, something that might have been called a tiger or a mountain lion if anyone was willing to suspend all disbelief about the size and the intelligence visible in her ancient eyes. Liam watched all of this happen and felt something crack open inside his chest. He had always believed in the impossible. He had read science fiction novels and watched documentaries about space and spent countless nights staring up at the stars wondering if there was anything out there. And now, faced with the actual impossible standing in his living room, he felt less fear than wonder. Maya collapsed onto his bed without asking permission, and Liam did not object. Instead, he gathered blankets and a pillow, trying to make her as comfortable as possible. He wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but he could see that she was in no state to answer them. Her skin was flickering between colors, shifting rapidly between gold and silver and shades of color that had no human names. Her breathing was shallow and irregular. Whatever was wrong with her, it was urgent and serious. He sat in a chair beside the bed and simply watched her sleep. Ember had stretched out on the floor, her feline form radiating heat and safety. Outside, he could hear the occasional movements of Azure on the roof, the scrape of massive claws against wooden shingles, the soft rumble of dragon breathing. His entire reality had shifted in the space of a few heartbeats, and yet, somehow it felt right. It felt like something that was supposed to happen, a moment toward which his entire life had been building. When Maya woke several hours later, darkness had fully fallen. Liam had lit the oil lamps throughout the cabin, not wanting to risk trying to use the electrical system that he rarely relied on. The soft, warm glow of the lamps seemed to soothe Maya, and she slowly pushed herself up onto her elbows. Liam brought her water and food, simple things from his pantry. She ate slowly, mechanically, as if her body was going through the motions, even though her mind was focused on something else entirely. When she had finished, she began to tell him her story. She spoke of the Ethercan, of a civilization that had once spanned 3 galaxies and commanded technologies that modern humans would mistake for magic. She spoke of the disease that had slowly consumed her people one by one, a plague that their science could not cure, that their healers could not stop. She spoke of watching billions of her kind die, of being the last one left, of carrying the entire weight of her species' existence on her shoulders. She spoke with a calmness that somehow made it all more terrible, because she was so obviously speaking the truth. Then she explained about him. She had studied human genetics, she said. She had analyzed the entire human population from her hidden observation posts across the planet, and she had found him. Liam Thomas, a man whose immune system was unique, whose genetic structure contained a mutation that appeared in less than 1% of all humans. His blood could potentially do what millions of years of Ethercan science could not. His blood might be the key to saving her species. She did not ask him directly at first. Instead, she showed him images on a small device that she pulled from her pocket. images that displayed human cells and etherkin cells side by side, showing how they could theoretically merge and combine. She showed him medical scans of her own body, images that clearly depicted the disease ravaging her system, showing him the way it was consuming her from the inside out. Liam listened to all of this, and he found himself believing every word. The woman before him was clearly not human, clearly from somewhere far beyond the boundaries of the world he had always known. The creatures outside his cabin were real dragons, actual living dragons with scales and wings and intelligence that matched or exceeded human intelligence. Everything he had been taught to dismiss as fantasy and impossible was suddenly very real and very urgent. When she finally asked him directly, her voice was barely more than a whisper. She asked if he would be willing to undergo a transformation, if he would allow her to use his blood and the ancient magic of the dragons to attempt a merger of their species. She told him that it might kill him. She told him that it would certainly change him in ways he could never reverse or undo. She told him that she could not force him, that she could not compel him, and that she would respect any choice he made. Liam did not hesitate. He did not ask for time to think about it or weigh the pros and cons. He simply said yes. Later, he would wonder if that decision came from some deep place of understanding, or if it came from the fact that his life had never really amounted to anything anyway. He had survived the military only to retreat from the world. He had survived wars only to lose himself in peace. Maybe this was what he had been waiting for all along. Maybe this was the moment when his life would finally matter for something other than his own survival. Maya looked at him for a long time after he said yes, and he could see tears forming in her violet eyes. She reached out and touched his face gently, her fingers cool against his skin, and in that moment he felt connected to her in a way that transcended words or species, or the vast gulfs that separated their peoples. He knew that whatever happened next, his life would never be the same. He was making a choice that would echo through eternity, that would change not just him but potentially the entire future of human evolution. Outside the cabin, Azure called out into the night, a sound like bells mixed with thunder, a sound that carried meanings and emotions and ancient memories on its wings. It was the sound of dragons celebrating, of ancient magic awakening, of a prophecy that had been waiting for millennia finally beginning to fulfill itself. The next morning arrived gray and misty, the kind of morning that seemed to exist between night and day, not quite committed to either. Liam woke to find Maya already awake, sitting by the window with Ember curled up beside her like a massive feline guardian. The elf woman was meditating, her eyes closed, her breathing perfectly synchronized with the rise and fall of Ember's flanks. Azure was visible through the window, perched on a large stone outcropping that overlooked the cabin, her wings folded neatly against her sides as she watched the forest beyond. Liam moved quietly through the cabin, not wanting to disturb Maya's meditation. He built up the fire in the stone fireplace and began preparing a simple breakfast, his hands moving through the familiar motions with practiced ease. He had done this same thing countless mornings over the 3 years he had lived here alone. But today it felt different. Today he was preparing food not just for himself but for a woman from the stars and 2 ancient dragons. The ordinary had become extraordinary in a single night. Maya opened her eyes and turned to look at him as if she had sensed the moment when he finished his preparation. She rose gracefully and joined him at the simple wooden table that served as his dining area. She ate small portions of the food he offered, still moving with the careful deliberation of someone fighting through pain and exhaustion. She told him that they needed to begin preparing immediately. The disease was accelerating, she explained. Her medical scanners indicated that she had perhaps 48 hours before her body would begin to shut down in ways that could not be reversed. Even with the transformation ritual, they could not afford to wait, could not afford to move slowly or cautiously. The ritual itself would take approximately 8 hours, and it required both physical and mental preparation that would be demanding for both of them. Liam nodded and asked what he needed to do. Maya stood and walked to the window and he followed, watching as she raised her hand to her lips and let out a soft whistling sound that was unlike anything he had ever heard before. The sound seemed to resonate at a frequency that made his teeth ache and his bones vibrate. Azure heard the call and immediately launched herself from the stone outcropping, her massive wings catching the air currents and carrying her swiftly toward the cabin. The dragon landed just beyond the doorway, her wings sweeping back into her body as she moved into the living space with surprising grace for something so large. Ember uncurled herself from her resting position and approached Azure, and the 2 dragons touched their foreheads together in a gesture that Liam somehow understood meant deep respect and affection. Azure let out a low rumbling sound that resonated through the entire cabin, making the oil lamps flicker. Maya explained that Azure and Ember would teach Liam what he needed to know before the ritual could begin. The transformation was not a simple medical procedure. It was a magical merging of different forms of consciousness, different ways of being. Liam's mind would need to be prepared for the sensation of becoming something he had never been before. His body would need to be ready for changes at a cellular level that modern science would insist were impossible. The dragons would guide him through meditation techniques that had been developed by the Etherkin over thousands of years. They would help him access parts of his consciousness that humans typically never accessed. They would prepare him for the moment when his individual awareness would begin to merge with the greater consciousness that the dragons carried with them. Azure approached Liam and lowered her massive head until her snout was level with his own face. Her eyes were ancient and knowing, containing depths of intelligence and experience that made him feel very small and very fragile. But there was kindness in those ancient eyes, kindness and understanding and a willingness to help him through this transformation. Liam felt it then, a sudden flood of sensation and emotion and knowledge that came from the dragon through the simple act of her looking into his eyes. He gasped and staggered backward, but Azure remained still, allowing him to process the experience. Flashes of imagery ran through his mind. He saw vast cities made of crystal and light. He saw stars being born and planets being formed. He saw ancient wars between civilizations so advanced that they made human conflicts seem like children, playing at being soldiers. He saw millions of years of history compressed into a few seconds, and somehow his mind was vast enough to contain all of it. When the vision cleared, Liam found himself on his knees, tears streaming down his face. Maya was there immediately, her cool hand resting on his shoulder, her voice soft and soothing as she told him that this was normal, that what he had experienced was just a small glimpse of what the dragons contained within their consciousness. They spent the entire day in preparation. Liam sat in the center of the cabin with Azure on one side of him and Ember on the other, and they guided him through meditation after meditation. His mind expanded and contracted, learning to access new ways of thinking and being. He began to perceive things that humans did not normally perceive, subtle energies that flowed through all living things, connections that linked all conscious beings together in a vast and intricate web. Maya prepared the ritual space slowly and carefully. She moved furniture to clear an area of the cabin's main room. She used a powder that she had brought with her from her ship, a substance that seemed to glow faintly in the dimming light of the cabin. She created a large circle on the wooden floor, and within that circle she drew intricate symbols that hurt to look at directly, symbols that seemed to exist in more dimensions than Liam's human mind could normally perceive. As evening fell, Liam felt more prepared than he had ever been for anything in his life. He understood now, at least on some fundamental level, what was about to happen. He and Maya would stand in the circle. The dragons would add their power to the ritual, and then the merging would begin. His human genetics intertwining with her etherkin genetics, his human consciousness beginning to touch and merge with the vast ancient consciousness that the dragons carried within them. Maya explained that during the transformation, he would likely experience fear. He would experience pain, but he had to remember that those sensations would only last for a limited time, and they were the price of becoming something new, something that had never existed in the universe before. She told him that she would be with him the entire time, that she would help guide him through the most difficult moments. Liam prepared himself mentally. He changed into simple clothes. He ate a final meal of light foods that Maya recommended. As the night deepened and the stars became visible through the cabin's windows, they stood together in the glowing circle that she had created. Azure and Ember positioned themselves at opposite ends of the circle, their massive heads raised, their eyes beginning to glow with an inner radiance that seemed to come from some deep place within their dragon consciousness. Maya took Liam's hand, and he was struck by how small her hand was, how delicate her fingers were, yet he could feel the power flowing through her, the same power that the dragons carried, the same ancient magic that had shaped worlds and star systems. The ritual was about to begin. There was no going back now, no turning away from the choice he had made. Liam took a deep breath and squeezed Maya's hand, trying to convey through that simple gesture that he was ready, that he trusted her, that he understood the magnitude of what was about to happen. The dragons began to chant, or sing, or speak in a language that was older than human civilization. The sound filled the cabin and seemed to extend beyond the physical boundaries of the space itself. Liam felt the circle beneath his feet beginning to glow brighter, felt the air around him becoming thick and heavy with magical energy. And then, the transformation began. The pain came first, sharp and sudden, as if someone had ignited fire in every nerve ending of Liam's body simultaneously. He gasped and tried to pull away, but Maya held his hand firm, her strength far greater than her delicate frame suggested. Her eyes were glowing now, matching the violet radiance that filled the cabin as the ritual reached its crescendo. The dragon's chanting grew louder, more intense, and the sound began to resonate with frequencies that seemed to bypass his ears entirely and speak directly to his cells. Liam's vision blurred and distorted. He felt as though he was simultaneously existing in multiple places at once. Part of his consciousness remained in the cabin, aware of his body standing in the glowing circle, but another part of him was soaring through star fields, experiencing visions of ancient worlds and civilizations that had risen and fallen long before humanity had even discovered fire. Another part of him was sinking deep into the earth, experiencing the slow geological time of stone and soil, and the ancient memories stored within the planet itself. Maya squeezed his hand and her voice reached him through the chaos, calm and steady and utterly grounded in reality. She told him to focus on his breathing, to find the rhythm of his heartbeat and hold on to it like an anchor. She told him that he was doing well, that he was almost through the first stage, that he just needed to hold on a little longer. Liam focused on those things. He felt his heartbeat, strong and steady despite the chaos of the transformation occurring within his body. He became aware that his skin was changing color, shifting between shades of warm gold and cool silver, just like Maya's had been doing when she was in pain. He could feel his cells reorganizing themselves at a fundamental level, his genetic code being rewritten by something that combined dragon venom with etherkin magic with the power of his own human will. The chanting of the dragons reached a crescendo and suddenly something shifted. The pain did not disappear, but it transformed into something different, something that Liam could almost describe as pleasure. It was as if his nervous system was being upgraded, as if he was developing sensory organs and abilities that had been dormant within him his entire life. He began to perceive the energy fields that flowed through all living things. He could see the light that surrounded Maya's body, could see the vast complexity of dragon consciousness represented as intricate patterns of luminescence and power. His eyes opened, or perhaps they had been open the entire time, but now he could actually see what was happening. His human eyes were changing, taking on the same violet luminescence that characterized Maya's eyes. His perception was shifting, reality appearing in layers and layers of complexity that his human mind was just barely capable of comprehending. The dragon's chanting was no longer just sound, but seemed to be transmitting information directly into his mind, teaching him the fundamental nature of existence itself. Maya's hand was still gripping his, and he could feel the transformation happening to her as well. The disease that had been ravaging her body was being purged, consumed by the magical energy that was flowing through her during this ritual. She was being healed even as he was being transformed. The two of them were merging not just physically but spiritually, their consciousness beginning to touch and merge at the edges, like two rivers flowing together into a single stream. Time became meaningless. Liam could not tell if the transformation was taking 5 minutes or 5 hours or 5 days. All he knew was the sensation of change, of becoming something that was not human but not quite alien either, something new and unprecedented. He felt his bones strengthen and become denser, capable of withstanding forces that human bones could never endure. He felt his muscles reconfigure themselves, developing the capacity for power and grace that was characteristic of the etherkin. But more than the physical changes, it was the mental and spiritual changes that shook him to his core. His consciousness expanded impossibly, and suddenly he could perceive not just the cabin around him, but the entire forest surrounding the cabin. He could sense the trees and the animals and the smallest insects, perceiving them all as nodes in a vast network of living energy. He could sense the planet itself, aware of its rotation and its journey around the sun, aware of the subtle magnetic fields and energetic flows that made life possible on this world. And he could sense the dragons. Their consciousness was vast and ancient and overwhelming, and they were carefully controlling the flow of their awareness so that it would not completely overpower his still new and fragile transformed consciousness. Azure and Ember were like living libraries containing memories and knowledge that stretched back thousands of years. They were teaching him things with every moment of connection, imparting understanding that would have taken a human years to learn through conventional education. Gradually, very gradually, the intensity of the ritual began to decrease. The dragon's chanting became slower, more measured. The glow of the circle beneath his feet began to fade. Maya's grip on his hand loosened slightly, though she did not let go entirely. Liam became aware once again of his individual consciousness, separate from the vast expanded awareness that had briefly touched everything around him. But he was changed now, fundamentally and permanently altered. He could still perceive things at that expanded level if he chose to focus his attention that way, but he could also pull back into a normal human scale of awareness if he needed to. The moment the ritual fully completed, Liam collapsed to his knees. His body was drenched in sweat, and his muscles felt like they had been pushed to their absolute limits. But he was also exhilarated, alive in a way that he had never been alive before. His senses were so acute that he could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the individual hairs on his body responding to the subtle air currents in the cabin, could taste the ozone and magical energy that hung in the air. Maya collapsed beside him and he caught her in his arms. She was laughing and crying at the same time, her body shaking with the release of emotion and the sudden absence of pain. The disease that had been consuming her was gone, completely eradicated by the transformation. She was whole again, or perhaps she was whole for the first time in her life. Azure and Ember moved toward them, their massive forms somehow fitting into the cabin through some combination of magic and will. The dragons pressed their massive heads down toward the two of them, and Liam felt their ancient consciousness brush against his new awareness. There was approval there and joy and something that might have been pride. They lay there on the floor of the cabin, surrounded by the glowing remains of the ritual circle, two beings from different worlds having just created something entirely new and unprecedented. Liam could feel the changes in his body continuing even now. Smaller adjustments, the final refinements of his transformation. His skin retained some of the violet luminescence, and his eyes would never return to being purely human blue again. Maya lifted her head and looked into his face, and he saw his own wonder reflected in her violet eyes. She whispered his name, just testing how it sounded now that she could perceive him as he truly was, no longer hiding his new nature beneath human appearances. He was no longer just Liam. He was something new, something that the universe had never seen before. And somehow in that moment, surrounded by dragons and the remnants of powerful ancient magic, covered in the sweat of transformation and the tears of release, he felt more at peace than he had ever felt in his entire life. Outside the cabin, the first light of dawn was breaking across the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. A new day was beginning. A new era was beginning, and nothing would ever be the same again. 3 days passed before Liam could walk without his legs trembling beneath him. His body had been thoroughly altered at every level, and even though the transformation was complete, his mind was still adjusting to the new capabilities and sensations that came with his changed form. Maya spent those 3 days helping him learn to use his expanded perception, teaching him to filter the overwhelming sensory input into manageable streams of information. She showed him how to extend his consciousness outward, to sense things at a distance, how to perceive the energy flows that connected all living things to one another. She taught him to suppress the violet luminescence in his eyes when he wanted to appear human, though she explained that he would never be able to pass as entirely human anymore. His bone structure had changed subtly but noticeably, his movements too graceful and too precise to belong to a normal human being. On the 4th day after the transformation, Maya revealed to him that she had been broadcasting a signal since the ritual completed. The signal had been sent across the star systems to the remaining settlements of the Etherkin, to the small groups of her people who had survived the disease in isolated pockets scattered throughout the galaxy. She had told them what had happened, had explained the successful transformation and the merging of human and Etherkin genetics. The response was already coming back. Communications from leaders of far distant Etherkin settlements, all expressing a mixture of hope and skepticism. Some believed that the transformation could work on a broader scale. Others were doubtful, arguing that it was too risky to attempt on their entire population. But all of them were listening. All of them understood that this might be their last chance at survival. Liam learned that Maya was not simply an exiled princess, but the heir to the Etherkin throne, the last surviving member of the royal bloodline. Her decision to seek out a human for this transformation had been a desperate gamble, one that many of her advisors had called madness. But now that it had succeeded, Her word carried enormous weight among her people. Azure and Ember spent much of their time communing with the dragons that still existed across the galaxy. Their consciousness seemed to reach across the vast distances of space through methods that Liam's newly expanded mind could only partially comprehend. It had something to do with quantum entanglement and the fundamental connection that all dragons shared with one another regardless of physical location. The dragons were spreading the news of what had happened, telling their own kind about the successful merger of species. On the 5th day, Liam and Maya took a walk through the forest surrounding the cabin. It was a clear afternoon, the kind of perfect autumn day that made Liam remember why he had been drawn to this place in the first place. The leaves were beginning to change color, splashing the hillsides in shades of gold and crimson and deep orange. The air was cool but not unpleasantly so, and carrying that mixture of scents that meant the transition between seasons. They walked in comfortable silence for much of the journey. But eventually Maya began to explain her thoughts about what would come next. She told him that the Etherkin Council would almost certainly want to attempt the transformation on a broader scale. They would want to send volunteers to Earth to undergo the same process that Liam had undergone. If it worked, it would represent the salvation of her entire civilization. But there would be complications, she warned him. Some humans would need to learn the truth about aliens and advanced civilizations. Some humans would react with fear and hostility to the idea that humanity was not alone in the universe and never had been. There would be those who would see the presence of the Etherkin as a threat, who would want to resist or oppose the transformation process. Humans could be unpredictable and sometimes violent when confronted with things that challenged their understanding of the world. Liam considered all of this carefully. His new consciousness gave him the ability to think in more complex ways, to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously, and understand the reasoning behind different viewpoints. He understood what Maya was describing, but he also understood that there was no other option. The Etherkin were dying. Without this transformation, the entire species would be extinct within a few generations. Whatever difficulties lay ahead, they had to be faced and overcome. He told Maya that he would help her in any way that he could. He would stand as proof that the transformation worked. He would help the Etherkin learn to interact with humanity. He would do whatever was necessary to ensure that her people survived and thrived on this world that had become his home. Maya reached over and took his hand as they walked, and he felt the warmth of her touch, the subtle exchange of energy that occurred whenever they made physical contact now. Their genetics were intertwined now, their consciousness forever linked through the ritual that had created him. He would never be able to completely separate from her, and somehow that did not frighten him. It felt right. It felt like exactly how things were meant to be. That night they received their first off-world visitor. A dragon descended through the atmosphere with a small spacecraft hidden in the interdimensional fold that dragons could access through their magic. The dragon was different from Azure and Ember, larger and somehow more ancient, with scales the color of midnight and eyes that glowed with something like the reflection of distant supernovas. Maya greeted the dragon with profound respect, bowing deeply and placing her hand over her heart. She explained to Liam that this was one of the eldest dragons, one of the masters of the dragon consciousness that existed beyond normal space and time. The dragon had come to personally assess the transformation and determine if it would be possible to scale it up for the broader salvation of the Etherkin. The dragon's consciousness was so vast and so ancient that Liam felt almost lost in it at first, but Azure and Ember were there, helping to anchor him, helping his newer transformed mind navigate the incredible complexity of the Elder Dragon's awareness. Through the merged consciousness, the Elder Dragon was able to directly perceive the changes in Liam's genetics, the way his human DNA had interwoven with Etherkin DNA, the way their biological systems were now functioning as a unified whole. The Elder Dragon released Liam from the connection and made a sound like bells and distant thunder. Through the dragon's translation, Maya received the message. The transformation had been successful beyond what had been hoped for. Liam's human genetics had not simply accepted the Etherkin changes, but had actually improved them, creating something stronger and more resilient than pure Etherkin would have been. The merger of species was not just theoretically possible, it was superior. It was the next step in evolution for the Etherkin. The Elder Dragon remained with them for 2 days, using that time to study not just Liam but the overall compatibility between human and Etherkin biology at a fundamental level. When it departed, It carried with it a complete genetic map and all the knowledge it had gained. The information would be distributed across all the Etherkin settlements. Plans would be made. Volunteers would be trained. Within months, there could be dozens of humans undergoing the transformation process. Within a year, there could be hundreds. Liam realized that his life had changed in ways that extended far beyond his personal survival and adaptation. He was potentially the first of a new hybrid species, something that would reshape the future of humanity itself. There would be questions and debates and moral arguments about whether this was the right path for human evolution. But the process had started now, and there was no going back. A week after the Elder Dragon's departure, Liam stood on the hillside overlooking his cabin with Maya beside him. They could see for miles in all directions now, their expanded perception allowing them to sense the life that flowed through all the forests and mountains and valleys stretching out before them. They were aware of each bird and insect and small mammal, aware of the slow growth of the plants around them, aware of the vast geological processes happening beneath their feet. Maya told him that she would be staying with him for now, at least until the other transformation volunteers began to arrive. She wanted to understand better how her new hybrid nature would evolve and change over time. She wanted to see how a human Etherkin merger would interact with human society and culture. She wanted to learn about his world and his people in a way that her years of remote observation had never allowed her to do. Liam told her that he had already thought about what would come next. He had decided to share the truth about his transformation with at least a small group of humans. They would need trusted humans who understood the reality of what was happening, people who could help bridge the gap between human civilization and the incoming Etherkin transformation volunteers. As the sun set over the forest, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, Azure and Ember joined them on the hillside. The dragon's consciousness touched both Liam and Maya simultaneously, sharing their vision of what the future might hold. Liam saw images of a world transformed, cities where humans and Etherkin lived alongside one another. Technology that combined human innovation with Etherkin advanced science, new possibilities that neither species could have achieved alone.